The NBA has a huge problem within the new CBA, of course, as spending has become more and more restrictive in order to best put forth parity in the NBA. There are some small problems that arise as a result of that, and one of them has been something that has been kind of a lingering problem for a while now, but I think is really truly accentuated moving forward within the CBA, and it really stems from the Rose Rule and the Supermax contract, which are designed to help small market teams, but might be having the reverse reaction for those teams. If you guys do enjoy the content here today, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And let's jump into that Supermax and what the purpose of the Rose Rule and Supermax contract are. Of course, for those who do not know, the Rose Rule is named after Derrick Rose, who was bringing back MVP caliber performances night in, night out on his rookie contract yet. And the entire point of the Rose Rule and ultimately the Supermax provision is to keep talented players with the original teams that drafted them, preferably in small markets, to best promote parity across the NBA. Examples of how this works. In the NBA, a Supermax contract refers to a designated veteran player extension that allows a player to receive a higher salary percentage of the league's salary cap, normally compared to what they'd be able to sign for. So that specifically is a 30 to 35% jump for Supermax players, and they can earn those honors with All-NBA status or winning Defensive Player of the Year, MVP. Some of those awards are what separates a player into those Supermax extension numbers, which is what we've seen from someone like Bradley Beal with the Washington Wizards previously. For a Supermax, a guy must be entering their 8th or 9th season in the NBA to become eligible for that. And again, it comes down to All-NBA, All-Defense, or not All-Defense, NBA Defensive Player of the Year, NBA MVP, at least once in the previous 3 seasons. So someone like gilgeous-alexander, with his next contract coming up for OKC, will be Supermax eligible. But then there's also the designated rookie max extensions, and this is where you look at the Rose Rule, where instead of making 25% what is called the fun max by ESPN's Brian Windhorst, you're looking at a more serious max contract. That 5% jump doesn't sound like a lot, but with the salary cap approaching $160 plus million, that 5% actually turns into $7.5–8 million, which can be the difference of another quality rotation player or not. So it is actually a pretty big difference both for the individual player and for the team organization. And in order to ultimately get that designated rookie max extension and then the Rose provision, the Rose Rule on top of it, that again is a qualification based on being an All-NBA team member, winning MVP, or Defensive Player of the Year. So you look at guys this year who became eligible for that kind of kicker into their contract. It was Cade Cunningham of the Detroit Pistons, who made All-NBA, and also Evan Mobley of the Cavaliers, who not only made All-NBA second team, but also ended up winning Defensive Player of the Year as Victor Wembanyama became ineligible for the award with the 65 games played requirement, which drastically changes the impact for these teams. And I think this is where you run into some problems. Of course, for franchises, you're saying, well, it's great for Detroit that Cade Cunningham made that All-NBA leap this year and led them to the playoffs. And it's fantastic for Cleveland that Evan Mobley had such a dominant defensive season and such a great season overall. And while I completely agree with you, remember, the whole point is to keep these talented players in their original markets with their original draft team. And while that has worked so far for Detroit and Cleveland, it might actually be hurting their teams, which is the problem. While these teams have been able to quote-unquote retain, whether it was Washington with Bradley Beal or now Detroit with Cade Cunningham, the Cavs with Evan Mobley, they've been able to retain their talented young players that they've drafted. It does come at the cost of reduced flexibility moving forward. Evan Mobley, I'm going to focus on him as the example in this video as the problem. While Evan Mobley, of course, is a key core piece for this team, were the Cavaliers projecting a $7–8 million bump in his salary? I don't know, because he signed a max extension, max designated rookie extension, one we just got done talking about a minute ago, and that will now kick in next season because of his Defensive Player of the Year and All-NBA status. And with that Rose Rule in place, he was set now, instead of making 25% of the league cap at $38.7 million a year. That number now jumps up to 30% of the cap. There's that 5% increase I was telling you about, and will now make $45 million plus beginning next season, which is, again, a very significant bump forward, and an overall $45 million jump on his next contract, which puts Cleveland a lot further into the tax aprons. If we look at the Cavaliers' tax status right now, not only are they way over the tax in general, they're actually slated to be well over the second apron. Right now, they were about $5 million over the second apron before Evan Mobley's number jumped. And as you can see here on the graph, with him even projected at just $38 million, they were well over the second apron. Now with him getting another $7.5 million roughly on top of that, they are almost $13 million past the second apron, which is going to come with its own set of problems and long-term concerns for the Cavs to keep this really good roster together. And while yes, it is going to help them hopefully long-term keep Evan Mobley there in Cleveland, there will be other guys who become sacrificial lambs in a way. One contract I want to point out, Max Strus's contract. Very likely we could see Cleveland salary dump him this offseason. And you look at Detroit, another example with Cade Cunningham. It hurts their flexibility. The fact that Cade Cunningham is going to be making more money now than he was slated to make because of all NBA honors actually hurts Detroit, which I think is pretty stupid and pretty silly, because these organizations, honestly, the best thing for them would be if their players had a great season, but if their talented young guy just happened to miss out on all NBA status for one season. But the reality is that's not how it works. And with the new games played requirement, 65 games to be eligible for end of season honors, well, there's a lot of players who are going to be receiving these honors that maybe wouldn't have if another player played 65 games instead of 62, or if another guy, instead of missing 20 games in the beginning of the season, played the whole year. And that drastically changes the award landscape. And you can say that's a good thing for the league in general. I definitely don't have a ton of pushback to that. But I think there are problems that arise long-term because of this, as maybe not the top 15 players in the world, but maybe the top 23, maybe the top 27 players in the world are now more eligible for all NBA honors because of who is ultimately eliminated from that. Think about the voting this past year. Victor Wembanyama would have won Defensive Player of the Year, would have won all NBA honors for sure. And he doesn't get either of those awards because he ended up missing time with deep vein thrombosis, completely changed his season, of course, and ultimately now changes the cap table for a variety of other teams moving forward. So what is the solution to this? To me, it really is super simple, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below. I think the NBA needs to adopt salary cap relief measures for homegrown Supermax and Rose Rule players. Talking about the Evan Mobleys, the Cade Cunninghams, the Bradley Beal when he was still in Washington, those kinds of situations. And I think it's a super easy fix. If a player meets Supermax eligibility requirements or Rose Rule eligibility requirements, like we saw with Mobley and Cunningham this most recent season, then that player is eligible to sign that Supermax. But if that player has only ever played for one team in his career, and I think this is a really important little nugget in here, it has to be for a player who's only played for one team in his career, that player's cap hit is only the standard max, the 25% max, which would give a team, specifically in the Evan Mobley case, nearly $7 million of cap relief on their books. And I think it's a much more sustainable measure to helping teams continue building their rosters. And if you're thinking about teams coming up in the future, OKC with Chet Holmgren, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Jalen Williams, it's going to be very, very hard for them to keep that core together moving forward. And along the way, there will be some players they sacrifice to free agency. And while that might be good in the name of parity in some ways, it's a really harsh punishment for a smaller market team like OKC to not just be able to keep all of their guys together. Will it come at the cost of Jalen Williams or Chet Holmgren? Perhaps. We'll see what OKC ultimately decides to do, but more likely than not, long term, it'll be Isaiah Hartenstein can no longer be on the Thunder because they can't afford him. Maybe they have to move off of Alex Caruso. The Boston Celtics are a team this summer who might have to move off some of their pieces. Will the Jays finally get broken up? That's a big question. And I think it's pretty ridiculous. If you're a team that has set yourself up to draft well, you draft good young players and develop them, you shouldn't get penalized as harshly by the CBA. I think the CBA is a really smart mechanism. The way that it's built right now prevents super teams being built and bought, and I think that's a good thing. But if you're drafting and you hit on a bunch of picks like the Oklahoma City Thunder have, specifically with the Holmgren and J-Dub selections, why should they get punished as heavily as, say, Phoenix for trading for Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant? I just feel like it's a completely different scenario and one that shouldn't have the same outcomes for these teams. And in my opinion, if they find it this way where a guy can still get paid, that player will still be motivated to stay with their original team. They'll be eligible for that 30% of the cap or 35% of the cap in the situation that you're talking about, a Supermax contract. And the teams still get to have a little bit of flexibility as well while paying their players. It doesn't limit what the players can make. I'm all for the Supermax and the Rose Rule and paying players a little bit more when they're deserving and warrant that. But I do think it is hurting the teams more than we initially planned for when the Supermax was first introduced a while ago. Now, I do think an important nugget here too. If a player who is on a Supermax contract gets traded, I do think for trade rules, we would have to treat it very similar to the poison pill provision for rookie extension players, guys who get signed to a new rookie extension. And I think the escalation of that salary cap hit would have to be included in the trade, which would mean any trade of a Supermax or Rose Rule provision player moving forward would have to probably be a 3-team trade, because you're going to have so much moving salary in a deal where there's just going to be some problems that arise because of that, because you're trading. For example, if Evan Mobley got traded in the next 4 or 5 years, the Cavs would have a cap hit by my rules, right? Not in real life, but by what I'm proposing here, a $38 million cap hit, but the team receiving Evan Mobley would be taking in $45 million on his next contract, his Rose Rule contract, right? So I think that would be a tricky thing for teams to figure out to facilitate trades. But again, the entire purpose of the Rose Rule and the Supermax is to help the teams keep their young talent in-house and to promote players staying with the team that drafted them. And I really don't think right now that it's actually doing that. In fact, I think it's hurting those teams, because you commit so much money to one individual player, takes up such a larger percent of your cap, and as a result, you're limited, especially with the new apron rules that have changed the league landscape in a big way. Again, I want to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below. Make sure to comment your solutions. What do you think about my proposed solution? I do think it is one of the best ways to go about fixing this problem. I think it's an interesting discussion to talk about. One that, as we get closer to the offseason, I think is an important thing for people to realize and note about Evan Mobley and Cade Cunningham and the Pistons cap table, and then also about the upcoming issues the Thunder could potentially face after such a historic run this season. I hope you guys have enjoyed. If you have, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.